He thought it was finally over. The blood, the pain, the war. But just when peace touched his hands, the past found a way to call back. One message, one name he thought was dead. And suddenly, everything he rebuilt was about to burn again. The city outside Elliot's penthouse shimmered like a dying constellation, lights flickering, fading, and burning out one by one. He sat alone in a room built from glass and silence, where the hum of wealth could not drown the ache of emptiness. His tailored suit hung loose around his broad shoulders, his tie undone, and the whiskey in his hand tasted more like regret than relief. The air smelled faintly of cigar smoke and rain, a mixture of comfort and unease. He stared out over the skyline, the empire he had built brick by bloody brick, and felt nothing. For years, control had been his oxygen. Every deal, every threat, every word, calculated, precise, cold. But tonight something in him felt hollow, restless, as though the ghosts he'd buried were beginning to stir. The shrill vibration of his phone sliced through the stillness. Unknown number. He watched it blink against the glass table, once, twice. He ignored it, assuming it was another late-night associate, someone begging for mercy or money. But then it rang again. Longer this time, desperate, insistent, like a knock from the past that refused to be silenced. With a sigh, he picked it up, pressing the cool metal to his ear. "Elliot?" The voice on the other end trembled, breaking through the static. His heart faltered. He knew that voice, not from memory, but from the ache it carried. "Elliot. It's me, Serena." The name hit him harder than any bullet ever had. His grip loosened. The sound of her voice was both a wound reopening and a lifeline pulling him under. The woman he had once loved and lost, the one who vanished without explanation 2.5 years ago. For a moment he said nothing, just breathed her name back into existence. "Serena?" The syllables barely left his lips, as if he was afraid the moment he said it aloud, she'd disappear again. Her breath trembled through the line. "I wouldn't have called, but I didn't know what else to do." Elliot leaned forward, his pulse hammering against his ribs. There was something in her tone. Exhaustion, fear, something broken. "Serena, where are you?" he asked, his voice low, almost pleading, though he didn't recognize it himself. The silence stretched for a beat too long before she spoke again, each word shattering the distance between them. "I need money. For our son's baby formula." The world tilted. For a moment he thought he'd misheard. The glass slipped from his hand, crashing against the marble floor, whiskey bleeding across it like spilled time. "Our son." 2 words that cracked the armor he had spent years building. His throat went dry, his mind refusing to form questions fast enough. "Serena, what did you say?" he whispered, the sharp edges of his composure crumbling. But all he heard was her soft sobbing, muffled as if she was hiding somewhere dark, somewhere unsafe. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor, echoing through the room. His reflection in the glass wall looked like a stranger. Powerful, yes, but lost, broken, haunted by a name he thought he'd buried. The city below blurred into streaks of light. "Serena, listen to me," he said, his voice rough now, commanding yet trembling underneath. "Where are you right now?" Her breathing hitched. It sounded like she was about to answer, but the connection crackled, her words fading into static. "Serena," he shouted, desperate, gripping the phone so tight his knuckles turned white. But all that came through was the faint sound of her sobs. Then silence. Just silence. Elliot stared at the phone, disbelief clouding his face. His pulse was still pounding, his body cold despite the heat from the whiskey. For years he had built a world where nothing could shake him. Not betrayal, not death, not war. But that one phone call had turned him human again, fragile and furious all at once. The penthouse felt smaller now, suffocating. He walked toward the window, staring into the endless sprawl of the city that once belonged entirely to him. His reflection stared back. A man who had everything except the one truth he didn't know he needed. He had a son. He could still hear the ghost of her voice, the way she said "our son" like a confession and a plea. What kind of life had she lived all this time? Why hadn't she come to him? Or had she tried and someone stopped her? Questions collided in his head like gunfire. He reached for the bottle, but his hands shook too much to pour. His mind raced back to the night she disappeared. The fights, the accusations, the lie he'd believed when his men told him she'd left for another man. He remembered the rage that consumed him, the fire that burned half the city when he thought she betrayed him. But what if she hadn't? What if everything he knew about her, about them, was wrong? A faint chill brushed over his neck, the kind that whispered of danger. He turned his gaze toward the darkened corners of the room, as if expecting to find someone there. But there was only silence. A heavy, expectant silence, as though the night itself was listening. He ran a hand over his face, trying to steady the storm brewing inside. The city lights reflected in his eyes like shattered memories. Somewhere out there, Serena was crying, and his son, was hungry. That thought pierced deeper than any enemy's bullet ever had. He was used to blood, to loss, to vengeance, but not to helplessness. He pressed the phone to his ear again, replaying the call, as if the sound of her voice could somehow give him direction, but it only made the ache worse. The clock on the wall struck 2, the chime echoing through the empty penthouse. Elliot's heartbeat matched its rhythm. Slow, deliberate, relentless. He walked toward the balcony doors, pushing them open. Cold air swept in, carrying the scent of rain and asphalt. Below, the city glimmered, alive, unaware that its king had just been broken by a whisper. For a long time he stood there, staring into the night, trying to decide if what he felt was real or a dream conjured by guilt and whiskey. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. He could still hear her voice trembling in his ear, feel the fear hidden behind her words. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. And the worst part, she had called him not out of love but desperation because she had nowhere else to go. He stepped back inside, the door clicking shut behind him. The room felt colder now, emptier. His phone screen was dark, but his mind wouldn't stop replaying that last sound. Her sobs dissolving into static. There was something haunting in it, like a warning wrapped in heartbreak. He tightened his fists, veins pulsing against his skin. He had spent his life mastering control. But tonight, that illusion shattered with a single call. He didn't know where Serena was or what kind of danger she faced. But one thing he did know, with bone-deep certainty. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, distant but growing closer, as if echoing the storm now brewing inside him. Somewhere in that same night, a woman cried alone, and a child waited for a father who didn't yet know how to be one. Elliot's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing into the dark horizon. He didn't realize it yet, but that call, that trembling voice at 2 a.m., had already begun to unravel everything he once believed about power, loyalty, and love. And in the quiet that followed, one truth settled like ash in his chest. The most dangerous wars aren't fought with guns. They begin with a single broken voice on the other end of the line, and as the lightning flashed against the city's glass towers, Elliot exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of a past he could no longer ignore. Somewhere out there, Serena was waiting, and whether it was fate, guilt, or something darker, he knew the night was far from over. The storm had only just begun. The storm had not yet passed. By the time Elliot left his penthouse, the city was drenched in rain, streets glistening like a web of shattered glass beneath the pale glow of streetlights. His car engine growled through the silence, the headlights cutting through mist and memory alike. He gripped the steering wheel tighter than he needed to, his knuckles pale, veins rigid. The call still echoed in his mind. That trembling plea, "I need money for our son's baby formula." Every word replayed like a curse, striking the same hollow spot in his chest again and again. He had spent years building empires, destroying men who crossed him, yet one woman's broken whisper had undone it all. The night air felt colder than it should have. Each gust that hit the windshield seemed to carry fragments of the past, Serena's laughter echoing through his memory, her soft voice whispering dreams he never dared to follow. He remembered the warmth of her hands when she begged him to leave the underworld behind, to live a life that didn't smell of blood and smoke. But back then, power had felt like purpose, and love. Love had felt like a weakness he couldn't afford. When she disappeared, the hole she left behind was unbearable. So he filled it with fury. He had believed his men when they said she ran away with a rival. He told himself she was nothing but betrayal wrapped in beauty. He burned everything that reminded him of her, photos, letters, memories. Yet no fire could burn the ache she left behind. Now, as his car roared through the rain-slicked streets, he realized something he never dared to admit. Hate had been easier than pain. It was simpler to call her a liar than to accept that maybe he had driven her away. His chest tightened as he turned down the narrow road toward the part of the city he'd sworn never to return to, the place where they once built their dreams before everything fell apart. The small apartment they once shared stood at the corner, aged and forgotten. Paint peeled from the walls, and the faint glow from a single window flickered weakly in the darkness, like a heartbeat struggling to survive. He parked across the street, rain tapping against the hood like impatient fingers. For a moment, he just sat there, watching the building. His breath fogged the glass, and he found himself hesitating. Something he never did. Elliot Stone, the man feared by half the city, was afraid. Afraid of what he might find behind that door. Afraid that the woman who once held his heart would look at him now and see a stranger. He exhaled sharply, forcing the thought away. Fear had no place in him, not tonight. He stepped out of the car, the rain soaking through his coat instantly, seeping cold into his skin. The air was heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and memory. Each step toward the building felt like walking through years of regret. The hallway inside was narrow, the lights dim and flickering, casting ghostly shapes along the cracked walls. He could hear a baby's faint cry echoing from one of the rooms, soft, trembling like a secret the night was trying to keep. His pulse quickened. He followed the sound, his footsteps echoing against the old wooden floor until he stopped outside the door that once belonged to them. The door was barely hanging on its hinges, chipped paint curling like old scars. Elliot hesitated for just a moment before pushing it open. The sound of the hinges groaning echoed through the small, dim apartment. The air inside was cold, not the kind of cold that came from weather, but from absence, from struggle. The faint scent of milk and damp air hung heavy, and then he saw her. Serena. She stood near a small crib, her back to him, her frame thinner than he remembered, fragile, pale, and trembling. The moment she turned, his world stopped moving. Her face, though marked with exhaustion, was achingly familiar. The same soft eyes, though dimmed by sleepless nights. The same lips that once smiled at him like he was her world. But now, her eyes held something else. Fear, guilt, and a lifetime of silence. She was holding a small child in her arms, rocking him gently, whispering something he couldn't hear. The baby's soft whimper filled the air, fragile and pure. Elliot's chest tightened until he could barely breathe. The little boy lifted his head, eyes catching the faint light. Steel gray, the exact shade Elliot saw every morning in his own mirror. For a second, everything inside him broke. He didn't need to ask. The truth was staring back at him with innocent eyes. Serena's voice cracked the silence. "Elliot," she whispered, his name trembling on her lips like a confession. He took a slow step forward, unsure if he was even allowed to breathe the same air as her anymore. "Serena," he whispered back, voice rough, uncertain. His eyes darted to the baby, then back to her. His throat felt tight. His words stuck between disbelief and ache. "Is he—" Before he could finish, a sharp sound shattered the moment. Glass. Breaking. It came from outside, sudden and violent. Serena flinched, pulling the child close to her chest. Elliot's instincts ignited instantly, years of survival snapping back like a loaded gun. He turned toward the window, his body tense. The faint reflection of movement flickered in the glass. Shadows shifting in the rain. Someone was there. Watching. He moved closer, careful not to make a sound. His eyes scanned the street through the raindrops sliding down the glass. Across the alley, under the pale flicker of a streetlight, a dark silhouette stood motionless, too still to be random. The figure shifted slightly, and for a split second, Elliot caught the glint of metal. A weapon, maybe. His jaw clenched. Whoever it was, they weren't there by accident. Serena's voice broke the tension. Soft but terrified. "They found me," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. Elliot turned to her sharply. "Who?" His voice dropped to a dangerous calm, that tone he used when he was seconds away from violence. She shook her head, clutching the baby tighter, her voice trembling. "I thought I lost them. But they've been following me for days." Elliot felt a cold rush down his spine, a mixture of anger and realization. This wasn't just a reunion, this was a trap, a warning, or maybe both. His gaze darted to the open door, then back to her. He could see the fear in her eyes, not just for herself, but for the child in her arms, for their child. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You should have called me sooner," he said, his tone sharp but heavy with guilt. She looked at him then, and for a moment, all the anger drained away. There was nothing left between them but years of unspoken pain and the tiny heartbeat of the child between them. "I didn't know if I could," she whispered. "I didn't know if you'd even care." Elliot swallowed hard, the words cutting deeper than he expected. "You shouldn't have doubted that." But even as he said it, he knew she had every reason to. Outside, a distant sound. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed through the wet pavement. Elliot froze, his body on alert. The shadows beyond the window moved again, this time closer. The storm outside intensified, rain hammering against the glass like a warning. He stepped in front of Serena and the baby, his hand instinctively brushing against the inside of his coat, where his gun was holstered. The air inside the room turned heavy, electric. Serena's breathing grew shallow. "Elliot," she whispered, but he didn't look back. His focus was fixed on the window, the darkness beyond it shifting like something alive. He could feel it, the eyes watching, the danger closing in. Every instinct screamed that whatever peace they had for that fleeting second was about to vanish. The baby whimpered softly, sensing the tension. Serena rocked him, tears slipping down her cheeks. Elliot's mind was already working. Escape routes, vantage points, lines of fire. The past had come crashing into the present, and he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had been waiting for this night. Then, a faint metallic click echoed from the hall outside, the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Elliot's eyes darkened. He turned to Serena, voice barely a whisper but full of command. "Get down!" In that moment, thunder rolled across the city, lightning flashing through the window, illuminating the fear in Serena's eyes and the resolve in his. The ghosts of their past had come knocking, and they weren't here for forgiveness. And as the rain poured harder against the glass, Elliot realized the cruel truth. He had come here, searching for answers, but what he found instead was the beginning of a war he didn't even know had started. The night that began with a phone call was far from over, and the past he buried was standing right outside his door, armed and waiting. 3. The thunder outside rolled again, louder this time, closer, like the sky itself was warning them. Elliot stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the door as the faint echo of boots scraped against the old wooden floor outside. His body tensed, every instinct flaring to life. The old version of himself, the man he swore to bury years ago, began to rise again, piece by piece. He could taste the danger in the air, sharp and metallic, like blood before a storm. He turned quickly, pulling Serena close, his voice low but firm. "You've been followed?" His tone wasn't angry, but there was something darker in it, fear mixed with fury. Serena's eyes widened, tears brimming as she shook her head. I thought they stopped when I called you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They've been after me for weeks, Elliot. I didn't know where else to go." Her words barely left her lips before the creak of the floorboards outside silenced everything. The sound wasn't just footsteps. It was the rhythm of trained killers moving in sync. Elliot's muscles tightened. He motioned Serena backward, his hand instinctively sliding under his coat. The familiar grip of cold steel met his palm. His gun, his oldest companion in a world of betrayal. He turned toward the window, fingers parting the blinds just enough to peer through. The rain distorted the figures outside, but not enough to hide the truth. 3 men, dark coats. One of them leaned against the railing, a faint tattoo glinting under the streetlight, the mark of Vincent Moretti's gang. Elliot's jaw locked. The name burned in his chest like poison. The man who'd destroyed his trust once, who'd fed him lies about Serena. The man who was supposed to be dead. His mind snapped into focus. There was no time to question, only to act. He turned back to Serena, his tone deadly calm. "Take the boy, get inside the bedroom, lock the door, and don't move." Her lips parted, a protest trembling on her tongue, but the look in his eyes stopped her cold. She nodded quickly, clutching the child tighter to her chest and retreating toward the back room. The baby began to whimper as if sensing the tension in the air. Serena whispered softly to him, rocking him gently even as her own hands shook. The sound of the lock clicking behind the bedroom door echoed through the dim apartment, like a fragile promise of safety. Elliot took a deep breath and stepped into the center of the room. The old instincts flooded back. The measured calm before violence, the cold precision that once made men whisper his name in fear. His heartbeat slowed, his senses sharpened. He could hear everything. The whisper of the rain outside, the soft drip of water from a broken pipe, the creak of the doorknob turning. The first shot shattered the silence. The door exploded inward, splinters flying as a burst of gunfire tore through the air. Elliot dove behind the couch, his gun already raised. The flash of muzzle fire illuminated the room in brief, violent bursts. He returned fire. 3 clean shots, each one placed with deadly accuracy. One man fell instantly, crashing against the wall, his weapon clattering across the floor. The other 2 spread out, moving with military precision. They weren't amateurs. Vincent had sent professionals. Elliot rolled behind a pillar, firing again, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. One bullet grazed his arm, the sting reminding him of what he was. Not a businessman, not a broken lover, but a predator who had just been cornered. He shifted positions, waiting for the perfect angle. The second man moved closer, boots crunching over broken glass. Elliot held his breath, then stepped out from cover. One swift motion, one clean shot. The man dropped before his body even hit the ground. Only one remained. Elliot could hear him breathing, slow, steady, like he was waiting for the right moment. Then a whisper came from the dark. "Vincent sends his regards." The words slithered through the air, venomous. Elliot's eyes narrowed. Rage flickered in them, sharp and deadly. "You made a mistake coming here," he growled, voice low and steady. The reply was a laugh, short, cruel. Then another shot. The bullet missed by inches, embedding itself in the wall behind him. Elliot moved fast, his body a blur of precision and purpose. He closed the distance between them, grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, and drove him into the floor. The gun clattered away. And Elliot didn't hesitate. One final pull of the trigger ended it. The silence that followed was deafening. Only the rain dared to speak now, its soft rhythm tapping against the cracked windows. Elliot stood still, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The scent of smoke and blood hung in the air. He stared down at the men who moments ago had filled the room with chaos. All of them were still now. His hands trembled. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Guilt. Because for the first time he hadn't killed for power or revenge. He had done it to protect them. He turned slowly toward the bedroom door. His pulse steadied. He walked through the wreckage, shards of glass crunching beneath his boots. "Serena?" he called softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's over. You're safe now." No answer. A faint unease pricked at him. He tried again, louder this time. "Serena, it's me." He reached the door, pressing his hand against it. "You can open it now." Still nothing. No movement, no sound. The silence was too thick, too unnatural. He twisted the knob, unlocked. His stomach tightened. Slowly, he pushed the door open. The bedroom light flickered, shadows dancing along the walls. The crib was empty. The window was open, curtains fluttering in the wind. Serena and the baby were gone. Elliot's heart stopped. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of struggle. A broken vase, a footprint, anything. Nothing. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The cold air from the open window bit into his skin, carrying the faint scent of rain and fear. He stepped closer to the window, his mind racing. He could still hear the echo of gunfire outside, the fading sirens in the distance, the rain washing blood down the street. But all he could see was the empty space where his family should have been. For a moment, he just stood there, gripping the windowsill, the weight of it all pressing down on him. Then his jaw clenched. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had planned this, every second of it. The attack, the distraction, the disappearance. He turned back toward the room, his gaze sweeping over the chaos he'd left behind. His empire, his enemies, his past. All of it had finally collided. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure who was controlling the game. Outside, the storm raged on, lightning flashing across the city skyline. Elliot's reflection in the window looked like a ghost, a man caught between the life he built and the life he'd just lost. He exhaled slowly, the sound almost like a growl. Serena was gone again, but this time, she hadn't run. Someone had taken her. He looked down at the blood on his hands, the gun still warm in his grip. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, beneath his breath, a promise escaped. Low, dangerous, and certain. "I'll find you, Serena. I'll find both of you." The rain outside grew heavier, pounding against the glass like a ticking clock. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine roared to life. Elliot's eyes lifted toward the sound, his heart already knowing what it meant. The game had begun again, and this time it was personal. As thunder cracked through the sky, Elliot holstered his gun and stepped back into the darkened room. The night was far from over. The ghosts that once haunted him were now flesh and blood, and they had just taken everything he had left to lose. 4. The storm outside hadn't stopped. It only grew worse, swallowing the city in a chaos of thunder and rain. Lightning flashed through the shattered windows, illuminating the wreckage of the apartment. Broken furniture, bullet holes, blood, and the faint trail of Serena's absence. Elliot stood in the center of it all, drenched in fury, chest heaving, his knuckles still trembling from the fight. The silence after the violence felt unbearable. "Serena!" His voice cracked as it tore through the air. He moved from room to room, kicking open doors, throwing aside anything in his path. "Serena!" he shouted again, louder, his voice echoing against the cold, empty walls. But there was no answer, only the distant wail of sirens blending with the storm outside. He reached the window again. Rain lashed against his face as he leaned out, scanning the narrow alley below. Faint tire marks gleamed in the wet street under the flickering light, fresh. The sound of an engine still echoed faintly in the distance. His heart pounded as realization sank in. Someone had taken them. They had planned this perfectly. The attack was never meant to kill him. It was meant to distract him. He cursed under his breath, fists clenching until his nails dug into his palms. His mind raced back through the night. The call. The attackers. The window left open. Every detail fit too cleanly. It was a setup. He slammed his fist against the wall, the plaster cracking under the force. Pain shot through his knuckles, but he didn't care. He could barely breathe under the weight of his own rage and regret. He had spent years building walls around his heart, convincing himself Serena had betrayed him, that she had chosen another man. But the truth now twisted like a knife. She had been hunted, not faithless. Just as he started pacing the room, his phone vibrated on the floor. The sharp buzz cut through the silence like a siren. He froze. Slowly, he reached down and picked it up, his hands still slick with blood and rain. Unknown number. No name. Just a single message. He opened it. The photo hit him like a bullet. Serena, tied to a chair, her face bruised, her lips split, tears streaming down her cheeks, a gun pressed to the side of her head. In the corner, his son, crying, terrified, clutching a small toy in his tiny hands. Elliot's vision blurred, his throat closing as the storm outside raged harder. Beneath the image was a short message. "You want your family? Bring me the money you owe. Alone." And then a name he hadn't heard in years. Vincent Moretti. Elliot stared at it, the name burning through his mind like fire. Vincent. The man who had lied about Serena. The man who had turned half the city against him. The man Elliot had once trusted as a brother before betrayal poisoned everything. He had thought Vincent was dead. He should have been dead. His grip tightened around the phone until the glass cracked. His breath grew shallow, his pulse hammering in his ears. He wanted to roar, to break everything in sight, to tear the city apart piece by piece until he found them. But his fury couldn't erase the truth. Serena had been right all along. She hadn't betrayed him. She had survived him. He sank to his knees for a moment, the gun still in his other hand, the message glowing on the phone like a curse. His mind spiraled through guilt and disbelief. All these years he had hated her for leaving. He had told himself it was easier that way, that she had chosen another life. But now, staring at her bruised face, he realized what she had been running from wasn't love. It was his world. He stood slowly, the silence pressing down on him. The clock on the wall ticked faintly. The only sound now. He wiped the blood from his face, his expression hardening, his eyes going cold and focused. Vincent wanted money? He would get more than that. He would get Elliot Black. Elliot moved through the apartment, grabbing what he needed. His gun, extra ammo, a small bag of cash from the false wall he'd hidden years ago. He tore a photograph from the cracked frame on the shelf, a picture of him and Serena before it all fell apart. Her smile in that photo cut deep. He folded it and slid it into his pocket. His phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, a voice note. He pressed play. Vincent's voice poured through the speaker, smooth, cruel, familiar. "Elliot," the man drawled, "you always did like to act first, think later. But this time, you'll think carefully. You'll bring the money to the old pier at midnight, alone. If I see one of your men, I'll make sure the next picture I send isn't so merciful." The message ended with a faint sound, a cry, his son's cry, then silence. Elliot's eyes closed for a second. Pain surging through his chest. He could almost hear Serena's voice in his head, the way she used to beg him to leave this life, to walk away before it destroyed everything. And now, because he hadn't listened, she was suffering for it. He opened his eyes again, and the softness vanished. In its place was the man the underworld once feared, the one who made rivals disappear, the one who didn't forgive betrayal. He holstered his gun and slipped on his coat, the weight of it heavy, familiar. The rain poured harder as he stepped out of the apartment. The city lights flickered against the wet pavement, reflecting in his dark, unblinking eyes. As he reached his car, thunder rumbled again, echoing through the streets. He looked up at the sky, water streaming down his face like the city itself was crying with him. Then, under his breath, he whispered, "You took my family, Vincent. You took the only thing that ever mattered. I'll burn your world to the ground." He started the engine, the roar of it cutting through the rain. The tires screeched as he pulled into the street, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Every corner of the city hid ghosts. His ghosts. Every alley whispered reminders of who he used to be. The phone buzzed one more time. Another message. Just 5 words. "Don't be late, old friend." Elliot's lips curled into a grim smile. Old friend. That was what Vincent had called him once, before betrayal turned them into enemies. The irony wasn't lost on him. He floored the accelerator, the city lights streaking past like memories he no longer wanted to remember. As he drove, flashes of Serena's face played in his mind, the way she used to laugh, the way her hand fit perfectly in his. The image of her bruised and broken twisted something inside him that words couldn't touch. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. And he knew redemption always came with blood. The rain thickened, blurring his vision, but he didn't slow down. He could see the old pier in his mind, abandoned, quiet, the perfect place for a ghost to come back to life. Vincent had chosen it for a reason. Lightning cracked across the sky as Elliot's car disappeared into the dark. The city didn't know it yet, but by morning blood would stain its streets again. And this time, the storm that had started years ago, the one born from betrayal and love, was about to reach its reckoning, because Elliot Black wasn't coming to pay. He was coming to end it. By dawn, the storm outside had dulled into a bitter drizzle, but inside Elliot's chest, the thunder hadn't stopped. His world had burned through the night, a battlefield of shattered glass, blood, and regret. The city stretched before him in shades of gray, cold and merciless. Like the life he had built on vengeance. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Serena's face the moment she disappeared from his life. That mix of pain and finality when she whispered, "One day, you'll understand." Now, standing in the silence of his wrecked apartment, he finally did. She had run not because she stopped loving him, but because she had to protect their son from the man he'd become. The realization tore through him like a bullet. He stared at the blood drying on his knuckles and thought, maybe this was what understanding cost. Maybe redemption had to be earned in blood. He moved through the room slowly, methodically. Every step echoed with purpose. The empire he'd built, every ounce of power, every man sworn to him, every weapon stored across the city, now meant nothing compared to the life of the woman and child he had once let slip away. His lieutenant, Marco, tried to speak as Elliot loaded a fresh clip into his pistol. "Boss, we can take a team." but Elliot silenced him with one look. No, this is mine. There was no need for an army this time. There was only guilt, truth, and the kind of love that came too late. He holstered the gun, straightened his coat, and walked through the door like a man going to meet his fate. Outside, the streets were wet, reflecting neon lights like broken promises. Every passing second pulsed with the name that had haunted him for 2 years. Serena. The car ride to Vincent's abandoned warehouse felt endless. The city blurred past him, alleys, bridges, the faint glow of streetlights flickering through the fog. Vincent. The man who had once been his brother in crime, now the snake that had poisoned his world. Elliot remembered the first time he'd trusted him. The same hands that had helped build his empire now held Serena's fate. Every memory hit him like a hammer. Vincent laughing beside him at the poker table, Vincent helping him bury enemies in the dark, Vincent standing as godfather at his wedding. And now, Vincent was the man holding a gun to everything Elliot had left to love. His jaw clenched. "You always wanted to destroy me," he muttered, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. "You're about to see what it costs." When he arrived, the warehouse loomed like a dying beast on the edge of the docks, silent, massive, the air thick with salt and decay. His headlights cut through the fog, landing on the rusted metal doors marked with fading graffiti. He stepped out, rain drenching him within seconds, but he didn't flinch. Every drop on his skin felt like a baptism, a violent cleansing for the sins he had carried too long. He pushed the doors open slowly, gun holstered, both hands raised. Inside, shadows moved like ghosts between the broken beams of light. The air reeked of oil and old blood. His footsteps echoed through the hollow space, steady, deliberate. He didn't call out her name, not yet. He knew Vincent would be watching, waiting, smiling somewhere in the dark. Then a sound, soft, strangled, broke the silence. His head snapped toward it. There, under a dim, flickering bulb, she sat. Serena. Tied to a chair, wrists bound, her hair tangled and wet, her face pale but proud. Even bruised, she looked like fire, unbroken, unyielding. For a second, the world stopped. All the blood, the years, the pain, it fell away. He took a slow step forward, breath shaking. "You came," she whispered, her voice trembling, the sound more powerful than any gunshot. His throat tightened, words failed him. But before he could reach her, another voice slid through the shadows, smooth, venomous, and far too familiar. "You always were predictable, Elliot." Vincent stepped out from behind a pillar, his smirk sharp enough to cut. He looked the same, tailored suit, cold eyes, the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. "Still playing the hero, huh?" Vincent taunted, circling Serena like a vulture. "After all the lives you've ruined, you think saving her makes you clean?" Elliot's hand twitched near his weapon, but he held back. "Let her go, Vincent. This isn't between you and her." Vincent chuckled darkly. "Oh, but it is. You see, she's the only part of you that still feels human. Take her away and you'll finally become what you were always meant to be. A monster." The words hit deep, but Elliot didn't blink. His voice dropped, low and deadly. "You talk too much." For a moment, the air stood still. Then, a flicker of movement. Elliot's hand went for the gun. Vincent's eyes narrowed. The sound of metal being cocked echoed through the warehouse like thunder. Serena's breath hitched. And then, a flash. A gun went off. The echo swallowed the room. Serena screamed. The next few seconds felt like eternity stretched thin. Smoke hanging in the air, Vincent's smirk twisting, Elliot's body jerking as he stumbled a step forward. The bullet had missed his heart by inches, grazing his shoulder, blood dripping warm down his arm. He didn't fall, he roared. The kind of roar that made the walls tremble, the kind born of years of rage and buried pain. Vincent fired again. And this time, Elliot was faster. The shot rang out, splintering wood, glass, and silence alike. Vincent ducked, laughing. "You can't win this, Elliot. You never could." But Elliot kept moving. Slow, steady, relentless, eyes locked on Serena, as if she were the only thing keeping him human. Serena was crying now, shaking her head. "Don't do this. Please don't." But Elliot didn't stop. He knew this wouldn't end until one of them was gone. Vincent's laughter echoed again, fading behind crates. "Tell me, Elliot," he sneered from the shadows, "how does it feel to finally lose everything you built?" Elliot's answer came in silence, the kind that promised violence. And then another gunshot, louder, closer, cutting through the sound of Serena's sobs. Smoke curled through the air, footsteps stopped, and in that one heartbeat of stillness, nobody knew who had been hit. The gunshot tore through the silence like a scream swallowed by steel. Smoke hung in the air, thick and trembling, while the metallic scent of blood mixed with rain drifting through the broken windows. Elliot staggered, hand clutching his shoulder where the bullet grazed him. But he didn't stop. Pain was just another ghost in his body now, one more scar among thousands. Vincent's laughter echoed through the shadows, mocking, sharp, taunting. "You can't even die right, Elliot." But Elliot was already moving. Instincts taking over, rage burning through his veins hotter than the wound. He lunged through the dim light, his boots splashing through puddles, eyes fixed on the flicker of movement behind the crates. Every step was a promise. This wouldn't end until one of them stopped breathing. They collided like storms. The crash of bodies echoed through the warehouse. Fists, steel, chaos. Vincent's gun spun across the floor, clattering near Serena's chair. Elliot pinned him down, but Vincent fought with the strength of hatred itself. Blows landed, blood spattered the concrete, and for a moment neither man looked human anymore. Just two broken histories trying to erase each other. Serena's muffled sobs filled the air as she struggled against the ropes, wrists raw and bleeding. The child's faint cry echoed from somewhere deeper in the shadows. Fragile, terrified, the sound pierced Elliot's mind like a blade. His son, his blood. The world narrowed down to that one heartbeat, the one reason he was still standing. Vincent took advantage of his distraction, ramming an elbow into Elliot's jaw, flipping him over with a snarl. "You think this makes you a father now?" He spat, blood dripping from his mouth. "You lost that right the day she ran from you." Elliot's teeth clenched, the words striking deeper than any punch. He swung back with pure fury, catching Vincent across the face, the crack of bone snapping through the air. "And you're the one who made her run," he roared. They rolled across the cold floor, crashing into metal beams and shattered glass. The rain outside picked up, pounding against the walls like drums of war. Lightning flashed through the high windows, illuminating them in violent bursts. Two silhouettes locked in a dance of blood and betrayal. Then, in one brutal motion, Elliot gained the upper hand. He slammed Vincent's wrist to the ground, the gun sliding near his reach again. Vincent tried to scramble for it, but Elliot caught his arm, twisted, and pressed his knee into his chest. The sound of bones grinding filled the space. Vincent's breath came in ragged bursts. "You don't get to win this time," Elliot growled, his voice low and shaking with years of rage. He grabbed the gun, pressed it to Vincent's throat, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Serena froze, her eyes wide with horror and heartbreak. Rainwater dripped from the ceiling, tapping against the concrete like a ticking clock, counting down to a choice that would change everything. Vincent's lips curled into a bloodied smirk. "You took everything from me," Elliot hissed, his finger trembling on the trigger. "No," Vincent whispered, choking on laughter. "You gave it away." The words cut deeper than any bullet could. For a split second, Elliot's mind fractured under the weight of truth. Flashes of the past slashing through him like shards of glass. The night Serena left, the whispered rumors Vincent had planted, the forged letters, the false betrayals, the manipulations that had turned love into poison. He had believed them. He had believed him. His vision blurred, not from pain, but from the unbearable realization that he had destroyed the only thing he ever loved because he trusted the wrong man. His hand trembled, his breath ragged. Vincent kept smiling. That cruel satisfaction of a man who thought he still had control. "See?" Vincent croaked, eyes gleaming through blood. "Even now you can't see straight. You never could." Elliot's eyes hardened. The storm outside cracked with thunder as if the heavens themselves demanded retribution. And then, with a whisper of finality, he said, "This time, I see everything." The gunshot was deafening. Vincent's smirk froze. His body went still, head falling back against the cold floor. For a moment, there was only silence, heavy, endless, suffocating. The rain poured harder, washing over the blood spreading across the concrete. Elliot didn't move. The gun slipped from his hand, clattering beside Vincent's lifeless body. His chest heaved, each breath a struggle between fury and regret. He'd won the war, but the victory felt hollow. Somewhere behind him, Serena's broken voice shattered the quiet. "Elliot." He turned instantly, the sound of her voice more powerful than anything left alive in him. She was still tied to the chair, face pale, hands trembling. He rushed to her, ripping through the ropes, blood from his shoulder staining her wrists as he pulled her free. She collapsed against him, shaking, barely breathing. "I got you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's over. It's finally over." But she didn't answer. Her eyes fluttered. Exhaustion, pain, shock. He held her tighter, desperate to feel her heartbeat against his chest, desperate to anchor her to the world. "Look at me, Serena. Please look at me." Her eyes opened slowly, glassy with tears and fading strength. She touched his cheek weakly, her fingers trembling against his skin. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "You were supposed to hate me forever." The words pierced through him, leaving him breathless. "Hate you?" he murmured, shaking his head, pressing his forehead to hers. "I never stopped loving you, not for a single day." Her lips parted as if to speak, but the words never came. Her eyes rolled back, her body going limp in his arms. "Serena!" Elliot's voice cracked, filled with panic and disbelief. He lowered her gently to the ground, patting her face, his trembling hands stained with both their blood. "No, no, no, stay with me, baby, please." Her pulse fluttered faintly under his touch, weak but still there. Relief and terror clashed in his chest. Somewhere in the darkness, the child's cry echoed again. Soft, desperate, alive. The sound snapped something inside him. He looked toward the sound, then back at Serena, torn between the two pieces of his world now lying broken before him. Lightning flashed again, revealing the chaos around him. Shattered crates, Vincent's lifeless body, Serena's pale face, the crying child hidden beneath an old blanket near the corner. Elliot crawled toward the baby, blood trailing behind him, wincing with every movement. The child was tiny, trembling, his small fingers clutching the edge of the fabric. Elliot lifted him into his arms, holding him close to his chest, feeling the fragile heartbeat against his own. Tears blurred his vision as he whispered, "You're safe now, little one. I promise you'll never be alone again." But promises had always come too late for Elliot. The warehouse creaked, thunder rumbling above. Rain leaking through the broken roof like the world itself was mourning. He looked back at Serena, unmoving, pale against the floor. Every beat of his heart screamed her name. He didn't know if she'd wake up, didn't know if she'd forgive him for the sins that had brought them here. All he knew was that he couldn't lose her again. Not now. Not after everything. He pressed a kiss to his son's forehead, set him gently down beside Serena, and tore his jacket to wrap around both of them. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance, faint, growing louder, crawling closer. The city was waking up to their storm. Elliot's hand brushed over Serena's cheek one last time, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Don't leave me. Not again." Her chest rose shallowly, barely there, but it was enough to keep hope alive, fragile, flickering, like fire in the rain. Elliot leaned back against the cold wall, gun still warm beside him, his eyes locked on her as the sirens closed in. And in that haunting silence between thunder and tears, it wasn't clear what would come next, forgiveness or another fire. 7. The sirens grew louder, echoing through the storm-soaked night as Elliot held Serena's lifeless form in his arms. Her pulse was faint, a whisper of life fighting against the darkness. Rain poured from the broken sky, soaking his clothes, mingling with the blood that refused to stop bleeding from his shoulder. He pressed his forehead against hers, whispering through shaking lips, "Don't you dare leave me, Serena. Not now." The baby's soft cries rose behind him, cutting through the chaos like a fragile heartbeat of hope. Elliot forced himself to move, his body screaming in pain, his vision blurring from exhaustion and loss. He gathered his son with one arm, Serena with the other, and stumbled through the debris-strewn warehouse toward the fading glow of his headlights outside. The world around him was chaos. Police sirens, thunder, the taste of iron in the air. But none of it mattered. All that mattered was getting her to a place where she could breathe again. His car waited like a dying beast at the edge of the docks, its door still open from when he'd first arrived. He laid his son gently in the passenger seat, wrapped in his blood-stained jacket, then lifted Serena into the back seat, his hands trembling as he adjusted her head. Her skin was cold, her lips pale. "Stay with me," he whispered, brushing the hair from her face. "Just hold on a little longer. Angel." The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the rain. He didn't care about the risk, the law, or the empire that would crumble when word spread that its boss had been seen carrying a bleeding woman into a hospital. For the first time in years, Elliot didn't care about survival, only love. The city blurred past in streaks of red and blue as he drove through empty streets, his mind racing faster than the car. Every second felt stolen, every heartbeat borrowed. He ran red lights, ignored the honking horns, the flashing sirens behind him. He could feel Serena's breath faltering in the back seat, her chest rising in shallow waves. "Hold on," he kept saying, his voice breaking each time. "You've survived worse, Serena. You survived me." His son whimpered beside him, the sound stabbing through his chest like guilt made flesh. Elliot reached over with his good arm, his bloodied hand brushing the baby's cheek. "It's okay, little man. I've got you both. I swear to you, I'll make this right." When the hospital finally came into view, its bright lights felt almost unreal, a sanctuary glowing in the heart of the storm. He screeched the car to a stop outside the emergency entrance, throwing the door open and shouting for help. "Somebody, she's been shot!" His voice cracked with desperation, echoing across the parking lot. Nurses and orderlies rushed out, their eyes widening at the sight of him. The blood, the tattoos, the wild look in his eyes. But they didn't ask questions. They lifted Serena onto a gurney, rolling her inside under the harsh fluorescent lights. A nurse reached for the baby, but Elliot pulled back instinctively, growling, "No. He stays with me." They hesitated, recognizing the command of a man who was used to obedience. Inside, everything blurred into chaos. Shouting voices, beeping machines, rushing feet. They disappeared with Serena behind swinging doors marked operating room. The last thing he saw was her hand falling limp as the doors closed. Then silence. The kind of silence that presses against your chest until it hurts to breathe. He sank into a chair, his clothes dripping onto the sterile floor, his son cradled against his chest. For years, his hands had taken lives, destroyed empires, written death into existence. Now those same hands trembled over the tiny heartbeat of his son, the only proof that love had ever survived in him. Minutes turned to hours. The storm outside faded, leaving only the rhythmic hum of hospital machines and the distant roll of thunder. Elliot sat motionless in the corridor, staring at his hands, his mind looping through every mistake that had led them here. The deals, the lies, the power that had meant nothing in the end. All that blood, he muttered under his breath, voice barely audible. And for what? His reflection in the glass door looked like a ghost, broken, sleepless, hollow-eyed. For once he wasn't the Mafia boss everyone feared. He was just a man who had finally realized that every war he'd fought had been against himself. When the door finally opened, he almost couldn't lift his head. The doctor stood there, older, tired, eyes filled with the kind of quiet compassion that came from seeing too many miracles and too many losses. "She's alive," he said softly. Elliot's breath caught. "But she's weak. The bullet missed anything vital, but she's lost a lot of blood. The next few hours are crucial." Those words, "she's alive," echoed through him like a prayer. He stood without thinking, clutching his son close, and followed the doctor down the hall. When he entered her room, the world seemed to hold its breath. Serena lay there under the pale glow of the monitor lights, her face fragile, her skin ghost-white against the hospital sheets. Tubes and wires ran across her body like thin lifelines, trying to tether her soul to the world. Elliot stood in the doorway, his throat tightening. Every part of him wanted to collapse, but he forced himself forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. He pulled up a chair beside her, his hand trembling as he brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I'm here." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then slowly found him. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, fragile as the air between them. "You came back for me." Tears welled in his eyes before he could stop them. He took her hand, the same hand he'd once held when their world was whole, and pressed it to his lips. "I should have never let you go," he said, voice shaking. "I believed lies. I believed monsters. But never again." She tried to smile, weak and tired, her lips trembling. "You always did love too late," she murmured. He let out a broken laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Then let me love you right this time," he whispered back. For a moment it felt like the world had paused. The storm outside, the hum of machines, even time itself. Her fingers tightened faintly around his. Their son, wrapped in a blanket, stirred softly in his arms. Elliot leaned closer, brushing his lips against her forehead. "He's safe," he said quietly. "He's ours." Serena's tears slid down her cheeks, a single smile breaking through her pain. It was the first time in years that peace had touched her face. But even peace, in Elliot's world, never lasted long. Outside the window, hidden by the rain-soaked shadows of the parking lot, a figure stood watching. A cigarette's ember glowed in the darkness, flickering red before fading. The man's coat flapped in the wind, his expression unreadable. He lifted a phone to his ear, voice low and calm. "He's alive. Both of them." A pause. "Yes, sir. The boss will want to know." Then he dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his boot, and vanished into the storm. Inside, Elliot had no idea that death was already circling again, quiet, patient, waiting for the next move. He leaned closer to Serena, whispering, "Rest now. I'll protect you both." But behind the walls of the hospital, the war he thought he ended was only beginning to breathe again. And this time, it was coming for everything he loved. The night outside the hospital had quieted, but inside, the ghosts of violence still lingered like a heartbeat beneath the walls. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed and trembling, the kind of silence that comes only after destruction. Somewhere in that silence, a man in a black coat walked away from the hospital's edge, his footsteps fading into the distance, his message already sent. Inside, Elliot sat in the dim glow of Serena's room, the rhythmic beep of the monitors echoing through the stillness. He hadn't slept in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Vincent's face, the smirk, the betrayal, the final bullet, and though he had won, the victory felt poisoned. His empire was in chaos, his enemies circling, and yet all he could focus on was the fragile rise and fall of Serena's chest beside him. Days bled into one another. The hospital became his world. White walls, whispered prayers, and the tiny laughter of a child who didn't understand the weight of the air around him. Elliot stayed there, never leaving Serena's side. He ate little, spoke less, but every time their son laughed, something inside him softened, a part of his darkness thawing. He would hold the child in his arms, awkward but tender. His large hands cradling the small body like something he was afraid to break. It was in those quiet hours, between the hum of machines and the faint smell of antiseptic, that Serena began to heal. Not just from the wound, but from the years of running. On the 5th morning, sunlight finally pierced through the blinds, gentle and golden. Serena stirred, her eyelids fluttering open for the first time since the surgery. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The sterile room, the beeping monitors, the white bandage wrapped around her arm. It all felt distant. But then she heard it, the sound of her son laughing. That small, pure sound pulled her back to life. Her eyes turned toward the source, and what she saw made her chest ache in ways she couldn't describe. Elliot was sitting by the window, their son in his arms. The sunlight catching the edges of his face. He looked clumsy, almost nervous, as he tried to make the boy laugh, lifting him high, whispering something only the child could hear. Serena's lips curved into a weak, fragile smile. "He's got your eyes," she murmured, her voice soft, trembling. Elliot froze for a heartbeat, then turned slowly toward her, disbelief and relief colliding in his expression. His eyes glistened as he took in the sight of her awake, breathing, alive. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking as he whispered, "And your heart." He moved to her side, carefully setting their son beside her. For a long moment, he just looked at her. The woman he had loved, lost and nearly lost again. "You shouldn't be talking yet," he murmured, his thumb brushing her knuckles gently. Serena shook her head faintly, smiling through tears. "Then you talk." Elliot's gaze dropped to the floor, his jaw tightening. Words had always been weapons for him, sharp, deliberate, never kind. But now they felt heavier than bullets. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said quietly, his voice trembling with something raw. "But I'll spend the rest of my life earning it. For what I did, for what I believed, for what I destroyed." His voice cracked. "If I could trade every drop of blood I spilled just to erase your pain, I would." Serena studied him, her heart twisting at the sight of this man, once ruthless, now broken and honest in ways he never was before. She reached for his hand, their fingers interlocking like two pieces of a story finally fitting again. "Then start by staying," she whispered. That simple sentence hit him harder than any gunshot ever could. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a door opening, a light flickering in the darkness. For the first time in years, Elliot smiled. Not the cold, confident grin of a man in control, but the fragile, trembling smile of a man who had finally found home. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, breathing her in, feeling the warmth that had once been his salvation. "I'm not leaving again," he whispered. "Not ever." Their son laughed again, his tiny hands grabbing at Elliot's collar, tugging him closer. Elliot chuckled softly, kissing the boy's forehead. "Looks like he already forgave me," he said. Serena laughed weakly, the sound shaky but real. For a fleeting moment, peace filled the room, the kind of peace neither of them believed they'd ever feel again. The storm outside had gone. The world seemed still. And the three of them existed in that fragile golden silence, a family reborn from fire. But peace, in their world, never stayed. The quiet was broken by a faint vibration on the bedside table. A phone. Elliot frowned, glancing at it. His own phone had been off for days. This was one of the spares he'd tossed there when he arrived. The screen lit up with an incoming message. Serena's smile faded as she saw his expression shift. The air thickened, the fragile warmth turning cold in an instant. Elliot picked up the phone slowly. The display showed a name that shouldn't have existed anymore. Vincent. For a moment he didn't move. His pulse hammered in his ears. His fingers tightened around the phone. Serena's voice trembled. "Elliot, what is it?" He didn't answer right away. The message notification blinked again. Pulling his eyes toward it, one word appeared on the screen. Alive. The world seemed to tilt. His throat went dry. Vincent. Dead and buried. Shot in the chest. Gone. And yet, that word sat there, like a ghost, returned to collect a debt. Elliot's jaw clenched, the darkness creeping back into his eyes, the kind of darkness he thought he'd finally buried. He looked toward the window, his reflection in the glass no longer that of a man who had found peace, but of one who knew peace never lasts in his world. Serena reached for him, her voice trembling. "Elliot, don't." He turned to her slowly, pain and fear mixing behind his gaze. "If he's alive, it means someone helped him, and if he's coming back, he won't stop with me. He'll come for you. For him." He looked at their son, the weight of the past pressing down like chains. Serena's eyes filled with tears. "You promised," she whispered. "You said you'd stay." He took her face in his hands, his voice breaking. "And I will. But staying means fighting, Serena. It means protecting what I should have never lost." The phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, "You can't hide forever." He exhaled sharply, the sound filled with fury and resolve. The man he used to be, the cold, ruthless boss, stirred again beneath the surface. But this time, he wasn't fighting for power. He was fighting for love. He glanced back at Serena, his expression softening through the storm building inside him. "No more running," he said quietly. "Not from him, not from us." She nodded, silent tears falling as she whispered, "Then we face it together." Outside, the sunlight dimmed behind clouds that began to gather once more. The echo of thunder crawling across the horizon, a reminder that even when love returns, the past never truly dies. Elliot picked up the phone, staring at the name one last time before crushing it in his hand, glass and metal cracking beneath his palm. Blood dripped from his fingers, but he didn't flinch. He turned back to Serena, kissed her forehead softly, and looked at his son. Small, innocent, unaware of the storm waiting beyond those walls. For the first time, Elliot felt both peace and war inside the same heartbeat. He smiled faintly. A real smile, one born not from victory, but from love that refused to die. "Whatever comes next," he murmured, "we face it as one." Serena closed her eyes, leaning against him, her hand over his heart. The machines hummed quietly. The baby's laughter echoed one last time. And beyond the window, the rain began to fall again, soft, steady, cleansing. Love had returned, but so had war. And somewhere out there, in the dark corners of the city they once ruled, the next chapter of their fate began to stir. Some stories leave you breathless, not because of the pain, but because of the love that survived it. This wasn't just about a mafia boss or a lost lover. It was about finding light in the ruins. If this story touched your heart, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to Heartwoven Tales, where every story is more than just words. It's a heartbeat, a tear, and a reminder that even in darkness, love always finds its way home.